This is We the People with Forrest Wilson. And now, here is Forrest Wilson.
The Ebola virus infection is systemic, meaning that it attacks every organ and tissue of the human body except the bones and skeletal muscles.
No force on earth can stop us.
So whatever we do, we're not going to eliminate travel from these countries.
The Ebola virus attacks connective tissue, multiplying rapidly in collagen.
No force on earth can stop us.
So whatever we do, we're not going to eliminate travel from these countries.
Collagen is the tissue that helps to keep the organs in place.
No force on earth can stop us.
So whatever we do, we're not going to eliminate travel from these countries.
The tissue is basically digested by this virus.
No force on earth can stop us.
So whatever we do, we're not going to eliminate travel from these countries.
Blood clots get stuck into blood vessels, forming red spots on the patient's skin.
No force on earth can stop us.
So whatever we do, we're not going to eliminate travel from these countries.
Also, blood clots does not allow a proper blood supply to many organs such as the liver, brain, lungs, kidneys, intestines, breast tissue, testicles, etc.
No force on earth can stop us.
So whatever we do, we're not going to eliminate travel from these countries.
Spontaneous bleeding then occurs from body orifices and gaps in the skin.
So whatever we do, we're not going to eliminate travel from these countries.
Death is caused by huge loss of blood, renal failure, or shock.
No force on earth can stop us. Thank you, everybody.
Vomit, diarrhea, blood. I wonder what else might spread Ebola besides close contact with an infected person. You know, roaches relish vomit and diarrhea and blood. I mean, don't mosquitoes love blood? Can insects spread Ebola? Have you heard anything about spread by insect? What about spread by illegal alien? We already have one instance of spread by someone who came in who really should have been barred from this country. Index patient Duncan. Welcome, comrades. This is Forrest Wilson. Welcome to the resistance. And our government, our massive feral government, with over 500 agencies, can't or won't shut down flights from the only source of Ebola, West Africa. Direct and indirect flights from Western Africa countries have yet to be shut down. I mean, does this make any sense to anybody listening to this broadcast? Wouldn't that be the first order of business for any government? Shut down the source. I mean, how do you feel about a travel ban? Does it increase cases of Ebola to restrict travel from affected countries? The lines are open, 904-222-TALK, 904-222-8255. You know the main issue in Liberia with the desperate attempt to shut down the spread of Ebola? It's isolating the sick and the dead from the rest of the population. Now, let me say that again. It's literally isolating the sick and the dead from the rest of the population. It's gone from outbreak to epidemic, and we now have an outbreak here. This may very well be the beginning of a global pandemic. So why is our government hell-bent on keeping the doors to this country open? Does it have something to do with a massive power grab like Dick Morris referred to last week, right here on this show? I mean, while we bomb ISIS, we leave our borders open. ISIS is here. And now Ebola is here. We have a full-blown crisis on our hands, and our government, with its 500-plus agencies, will not make a common-sense decision. It's reckless endangerment. They're recklessly endangering our entire population. And these decisions are the result of liberalology and a complete lack of common sense, not to mention the decisions of Barack Hussein Ebola. Did I just say what I think I said? Barack Hussein Ebola? I mean, is this intentional? I think we need a travel ban now and close the damn borders. I mean, what are you thinking? Lines are open. Let others know what you're thinking right now. 904-222-TALK, 904-222-8255. The very first duty of the federal government is to protect the American public, and yet the flights keep coming in and the border remains open. I'm on Priceline right now. Monrovia, Liberia, Roberts International Airport. One adult not showing any symptoms, asymptomatic. One way, no return. New York City, all airports. I'm going to set it for 3 days in the future, as I have 21 since I've just touched my dying pregnant girlfriend. one last time before I begin the 2-day walk to the airport. Royal Air Morocco, Flight 599, Monrovia, Liberia, departing Tuesday, October 21st. Connects in Casablanca, Morocco, arrives New York City, JFK, on the 21st. 2014 at about 5:15 in the afternoon. Total fare for this flight's, it's only $1,298. One way, per person. I mean, that's how easy it is to get into this country with Ebola. There's no ban on visas for Western African countries. I mean, it's so easy. An ISIS jihadi could do it. So should we accept the CDC director's resignation? I think we ought to call for it. His policies and protocols make absolutely no sense. And just like the lie heard around the country, if you like your health insurance, you can keep your health insurance. These protocols apparently only exist in the mind of CDC Director Dr. Frieden. By the way, do you know anything about the background of the Obama appointee, Dr. Thomas Frieden, the director of the CDC? Take a listen to him giving a commencement speech at his alma mater, Oberlin College, in 2012. Jack, pull up clip number 8, please.
Exactly 30 years ago today, I sat where you're sitting now, and a few hours later I rode my bicycle out of Oberlin and down to Tennessee, where I worked as a community organizer for a health clinic.
Frieden's a community organizer, an agitator. The CDC director is an agitator. We've got Patrick on line 1. Patrick, welcome to the Resistance. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Fine, thank you. What's on your mind, brother?
I was just wanting to pitch in on what you were talking about with the shutting down of the airlines to the West African nations. I think that should be done immediately, without discussion. And the southern border needs to be shut down, too.
Well, there's one thing you can do when you hang up this phone. Melt the phone line of your congressman and your senator. Let them know exactly how you feel. Patrick, thank you for the call. I want to get back into this Dr. Frieden, this Dr. Thomas Frieden, director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta. This is reported on WorldNet Daily. Previously served as commissioner of the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, whatever that is, mental hygiene, from 2002 to 2009 under none other than New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg. Under Bloomberg, Frieden was the architect of a variety of initiatives, from the prohibition of smoking citywide to the attempted big gulp ban that the New York State Supreme Court struck down as arbitrary and capricious. I mean, do you feel any better now about his quote-unquote protocols? This is the man who banned sodas, but can't ban flights from Ebola epidemic countries. What kind of agitator is this? I mean, this is unprecedented to have this level of negligence, reckless endangerment by one of our employees. We don't work for him. He doesn't rule by some edict. And Patrick, I would melt down the phone of my congressman and senator and let them know that we demand a travel ban. But remember this, Frieden, Ebola, Obama, all these people are public servants. They serve us, or do they? Now, I want you to take a listen to this letter to Barack Hussein Ebola from the National Nurses United, the largest U.S. organization of nurses, read on a national call-in conference in which about 11,000 RNs from across the U.S. and the globe joined to discuss what steps should be taken this past Wednesday to confront a virulent disease that the World Health Organization has called the most significant health crisis in modern history. Jack, play clip 6. This is Roseanne DeMoro reading the letter to President Ebola on the National Nurses United conference call. Clip 6, please.
The letter's today, October 15th, 2014. On behalf of registered nurses and other healthcare workers across the United States, we understand that the only way to adequately confront the Ebola crisis that the World Health Organization has termed the most significant healthcare crisis in modern history is for the President to invoke his executive authority to mandate uniform national standards and protocols that all hospitals must follow to provide safety for our patients, healthcare workers, and the public. Every healthcare employer must be directed to the following precautionary principle and institute the following: optimal personal protective equipment, and we go on, full hazmat suits, and we give the specification in line with the University of Nebraska Medical Center, that there shall be 2 direct care registered nurses caring for each Ebola patient, with additional registered nurses assigned as needed, based upon the registered nurse's professional judgment. This letter will be available on our website, and we'll hand it to the press. That there will be continuous interactive training for nurses, and we go on with more technical language around that. We want each employer to adhere to the standards that meet or exceed the University of Nebraska Medical Center, or a higher standard if it's in use. The Ebola pandemic and the exposure of healthcare workers to the virus represents a clear and present danger to public health. What we've heard this morning, obviously, is that another nurse has contracted the Ebola virus. We're expecting the situation to be worse. We know that without these mandates to healthcare facilities, we're putting registered nurses, physicians, and other healthcare workers at extreme risk. They are first line of defense. We would not send soldiers to the battlefield without armor and weapons. In conclusion, not one more nurse, not one more patient or healthcare worker should be put at risk due to the lack of healthcare facility preparedness. The United States should be setting the example on how to contain and eradicate the Ebola virus. Nothing short of your mandate to the President, the optimal safety standards apply, will be acceptable to the nurses of this nation. And we sent that to the United States of America's President.
Now, if you listen to the entire call, nurses from all over the globe relate their horror and fear as they fight on the front lines of this Ebola crisis. And, you have to listen to it for yourself. Don't take my word for it. You can Google it, or you can go to the National Nurses United website and not only read the letter, but listen to the entire call. And I believe you'll really get a peek at the front line of this fight and how unprepared they are, in spite of what Dr. Thomas Frieden has been saying. Dr. Thomas Frieden, we now know, a community organizer and agitator, much like our dear president, Barack Hussein Obama. I want to bring in, is our guest available? I want to bring in Lowell Ponte. Lowell Ponte's written a really interesting article, and he's got a diverse background, including being a reporter, a legislative aide, co-owner of a successful Hollywood public relations firm. He's worked for over 15 years as a roving editor for Reader's Digest magazine. He's reported in at least 33 countries, from Israel to communist Cuba. His articles have appeared in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Los Angeles Times, and many other publications. And I could just keep reading. This guy has quite a bio. Lowell, welcome to The Resistance. How are you?
Forrest, it's a great pleasure to be with you. Well, I'm happy to say I'm well for the moment, and I'm glad to hear you are, but we now all have these doubts. And this could cause untold chaos, for example, economic chaos, as we head into the Christmas season. If nobody wants to go to shopping malls, I guess this will be a great time for Amazon to send people gifts by mail or UPS. But
it's amazing the fear that's gripping this country over this one outbreak, this one person coming here. And you've penned an article titled "Ebola Drug Shortage Raises Terrifying Questions." What Ebola drug are you referring to, Lowell?
I'm referring to a drug that last August, you'll remember, there were 2 American healthcare workers in West Africa who came down with Ebola. The press was already starting to write their obituaries. And then suddenly they went to Emory University. They were given an experimental drug called ZMapp. This is a mixture of 3 monoclonal antibodies that basically go into the Ebola virus and bind to and tie up some of its key proteins, so that it can no longer reproduce as easily and so on. And lo and behold, they recovered. In fact, one of the 2 who recovered that way is the one who's been donating blood to some of these patients. that we've heard of more recently, because his blood does contain antibodies and does contain residue of ZMapp. And so America began to celebrate, and then suddenly the Centers for Disease Control said, wait, there is no more of this drug. It's all just vanished. They only made a tiny bit of it to begin with. It will take us months and months to get more, because it's a slow development process, even though they're trying to rush it. And this caused me, as a longtime science writer, to stop and say, wait a minute. They were on the verge of beginning clinical trials. You don't do clinical trials of a drug if you only have enough to treat a couple of people. You obviously have more of the drug on hand than that. So what happened to it? And my surmise, and I would have to applaud him if it's been done responsibly, is that the President of the United States used his power to requisition the available supplies of this drug to protect what's called the chain of succession. That is, if, God forbid, anything happened to President Obama, next in line would be Vice President Joe Biden. If anything happened to him in a pandemic, after him would become Speaker of the House John Boehner, and so on. There's a line of 18 people, well, 17, because one was born in the United Kingdom and technically is not eligible. The Secretary of the Interior can't become president. But there are 17 people in the chain of succession who need to be protected. And the question I raised in the column at Newsmax was, if the president has taken this drug, or if he's going to use his position to seize the first new supplies of it coming off the assembly line to protect the chain of succession, is anyone else going to be protected? Are they going to protect members of Congress, all of them or part of them? Are they going to protect the heads of the Joint Chiefs of Staff? Are they going to protect members of the Supreme Court or state governors? In other words, who on President Obama's ark will be in a position to live from having this drug, and who will just be left to die, even though thousands are dying right now? And by the way, we have warning from the World Bank that this could, by 2015, be costing $32.6 billion a year, mostly to the countries of West Africa. The World Health Organization says we could soon be facing 10,000 new cases of Ebola a week. And as we've seen, even when nurses use protocols that are supposed to protect them, somehow some of them come down with this disease. So it's apparently much more virulent than we suspected. There are even some researchers who say when you look back on incidents 600 years ago of the Black Death, they weren't showing the symptoms that we normally associate with bacterial disease, as the Black Death was said to be. They were showing the effects, according to one Cambridge publication, of viral hemorrhagic fever pandemics similar to Ebola.
Well, this is
so
fascinating.
Even part of the Black Death may have actually been Ebola.
Listen, have you got a few more minutes? Because I've got to take a short break, but when we get back, I've got a few questions for you. Can you hang tight?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, we're talking to my guest, Lowell Ponte. I hope you'll stay tuned. He's got some fascinating information. We'll be right back. You're listening to The Resistance, AM 600 and FM 100.3, The Answer.
Let's return to We the People with Forrest Wilson. Once again, here is Forrest.
Hi, and we're back with Lowell Ponte. He's got an incredible background, amongst others, being a reporter, a legislative aide, co-owner of a successful Hollywood public relations firm. And he worked at least 15 years as a roving editor for Reader's Digest magazine. Lowell, I want to get back to your article, and we touched on it briefly in the last segment. You raised this important key ethical question: with sizable quantities of ZMapp at least months away, who should be first in line to receive this scarce, potentially life-saving elixir? And you mentioned the line of succession, but there's more to it, isn't there? There's this whole fraudulent aspect of it where cronies and others get involved in this elixir. Talk about that, if you will.
What we have seen under the current administration is the systematic politicalization of medicine. We've seen the advent now, it's virtually admitted, of the equivalent of death panels under Obamacare. We've seen the president decide to take $750 billion out of Medicare and transfer it to support his own health care program, which is quite different. We have seen the Veterans Administration chaos. Now, the point being, once you politicize medicine, then who gets treated and how becomes a matter of political decision-making. I would applaud the president if he's diverted some of the CMAP drug to protect himself, the vice president, the chain of succession, because that helps stabilize our government. In fact, the president should say that he's done that or he will do it if he hasn't, because that will make Americans feel more secure, to know that our leadership is secure. The problem is, who else will get the drug? I guarantee you that every person in the government in a position to get this drug is getting calls today saying, you remember me, I'm Joe, I'm your third cousin twice removed, please supply me with some of the drug too. I mean, the amount of pressure to allocate this politically will be enormous. Will $1 Million Campaign contributors, for example, get the drug? We don't know. I'd like the president, in other words, to make a definitive statement as to who is getting the drug and who will not get the drug first in line.
Well, and you look at what's happening in Monrovia in particular. I mean, it's a complete breakdown of the government and the society. And I think if this information got out, there may be serious civil unrest. I mean, the division that's been sown in this country, is it even possible to put this information out there in such a way that people aren't suspicious and in disbelief over the allocation of the ZMapp drug?
Well, our government, and by the way, this drug was developed in part with help from the Pentagon for this little 9-person company called MAP Pharmaceutical in San Diego. So the government's been deeply involved from the beginning, working on it. It wouldn't surprise me if it has been to some degree allocated already. But even if this hasn't been done yet, it must be done very soon. That is, they're rushing to bring more supply of this drug as well as vaccines online, and the question then is who will be first in line to get those? I would say the president should be. I would say a lot of politicians and their cronies and hangers-on and contributors should not be, because frankly their survival is not essential to keeping the government running.
Lowell, in the last couple seconds of this segment, what is your thought on the future, the future of this outbreak? Do we have the possibility of an epidemic?
The World Health Organization itself has said if it's not controlled by Christmas, it will go out of control completely. By the way, I hope we have a couple more minutes.
Yes, I'll hold you over to the after the break here. We're talking with Lowell Ponte. I hope you'll stay tuned. Forrest Wilson, The Resistance, AM 600 and FM 100.3. We'll be right back.
Let's return to We the People with Forrest Wilson. Once again, here is Forrest.
And we're talking with Lowell Ponte. He penned an article, Ebola Drug Shortage Raises Terrifying Questions. Lowell, I've got a clip that I want you to react to. This is an interview by Media Research Center TV's Dan Joseph interviewing Dr. Jane Orient, the executive director of the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons, who's an expert on Ebola. Jack, play clip 4.
If you had to guess, when I don't want to put you on the spot here, would you say there are more people with Ebola in this country right now that we don't even know about?
I think there are others that we're looking at, and there probably are some that we don't even know about.
Oh, okay. So I mean, that's pretty terrifying. If there's some others we don't even know about, they perhaps don't even know about it either, right?
Could well be, or it could be that they haven't come in on the airplane. They could have crossed over our southern border. There's been so much talk about how wonderful it would be to have something like Ebola's to wipe out 90% of the population.
What do you mean by that?
Well, there are people who think that the Earth is greatly overpopulated, and there are people who would like to destroy Americans, and they don't mind blowing themselves up with a suicide vest.
Not exactly what I'd expect from Dr. Orient, but react to that.
Oh, well, he's absolutely right. I mean, we do have people who would be willing to use Ebola by turning themselves into weapons of mass destruction, or by seizing someone who is down with it here, if they found them first, and use the fluids of their body as weapons of mass destruction. We have other complications, too. At Drexel University, they've reanalyzed the data, and they calculate that people can have an incubation period before they show symptoms of Ebola of up to 42 days, not to 21.
I had heard that.
Yeah, which means someone can be infected and not showing symptom for a lot longer than we'd anticipated before. That throws everything we've been told in our plans into a kind of cocked hat, doesn't it? because we'd be clearing people to go into the country. Meanwhile, while many responsible Democrats and Republicans in the legislature are saying we need to shut down commercial air travel from these countries to the United States until we have enough vaccine and enough ZMAP that we can control the situation better. Not permanently, I agree, a permanent attempt to do that wouldn't work, but a temporary measure to buy time until early next year when we do have needed medicines, I think would be the rational and responsible thing to do. Contrary to that, President Obama is actually expediting the issuance of visas from our embassies in Liberia and Sierra Leone and so on to West African citizens to make it easier for them to come here. And he's now just appointed Ron Klain, for God's sake. You folks in Florida will remember Ron Klain. He was a major part of Al Gore's recount effort in the year 2000. And it was Ron Klain who had the bright idea that he would send lawyers into local Democrat judges asking them to discredit, to disallow the counting of absentee military ballots that had come in. Ron Klain is a political fixer. He's not a doctor. He's not an expert on infectious diseases. He has no scientific credibility whatever in what he says. But he is a political manipulator. And therefore we have to ask, why would the president, in trying to reassure the people, appoint a political fixer to, in effect, replace a prestigious medical doctor?
It belies comprehension, and I think it really is what I would term reckless endangerment of the American public.
Ron Klain is also the one who led the smearing of Clarence Thomas.
Yes.
When Clarence Thomas was up for a Supreme Court appointment. So, I mean, this is not a likable or very trustworthy person. Exactly the opposite of what we needed to reassure the American people here. So there are all these uncertainties.
Well, the CDC director...
We may even be dealing with what really was part of the Black Death 600 years ago here. It is a very serious disease about which we don't know nearly as much as we've been told.
Were you aware of the CDC director's background as a community organizer and agitator?
I am not that familiar with his background, but it would not surprise me.
I want to play this.
This has been almost the standard for getting appointed in the current administration.
Right. You got to listen to this clip of, this is brand new. This is a clip of Thomas Frieden back in his 2012 commencement speech to his college. He basically admits that he's a community organizer. Jack, play clip 8 again for Lowell.
Exactly 30 years ago today, I sat where you're sitting now, and a few hours later I rode my bicycle out of Oberlin and down to Tennessee, where I worked as a community organizer for a health clinic.
I mean, there's community organizers all over this organization, even the CDC director, Lowell.
Yeah, it is disturbing because these are supposed to be positions that are above politics. And yet, what are we seeing, even from some traditionally honorable people? We're seeing this, all the problems we're having is because our money was reduced or cut off. Well, their money hasn't been reduced at CDC. Maybe some of their increases have. And to the extent that it has been reduced, it was reduced as part of the sequester, the increases. Now, what that means is the sequester was originally proposed by who? By President Obama.
Exactly.
Who signed the sequester into law? President Obama did. So why are left-wing organizations blaming the Republican Party for cutting off CDC money? That all came from the president himself. It shows you how much dishonesty we're now seeing in this whole discussion. I suppose it's because it's so close to an election. But
yes, 2 weeks out.
Attempts to politicize it.
It is, and it's sickening in a just an amazing way. It's hard to really put your head around it, and especially when you read all these reports of what's happening around the country as these people suspect that they've been infected or they have been infected. They're getting on airplanes.
And if anything, what we should be doing now from a political point of view is bending over backward to protect the American people by cutting off the willy-nilly transmission of people from West Africa into this country, either by airline or by coming through the southern border, which has been left entirely porous.
Well, remember,
so
part
we
of
do
this
need to protect the people.
is really about politics, isn't it? It's about the prospects of a perpetual Democrat power structure, with the illegals being turned into citizens and being able to vote in the future elections so that Democrats can hold perpetual power.
Well, I have written 2 theses about this, and you're welcome to react to either one. Number one, I think we're seeing a new kind of gerrymandering, in which in the normal borders of the United States, they cannot find more than 20% of the population who describe themselves as liberals. As a result, the president has in effect redrawn the boundaries of the country to bring in the population of Mexico and the population of Central America, just as a way of changing the potential future voting pattern. Now, the left has had another problem, and that is to carry out Marxist analysis, you need a class warfare, and to have a class warfare, you need distinct classes. In particular, you need a proletariat, a working class that feels it has no social mobility or hope. The problem the left has always had in America is we don't have a proletariat. Everybody here can say, my child could grow up to be president. We have a sense of social mobility that is totally anathema to what Marx wanted to build his class warfare on. So what is Mr. Obama doing? He's importing a proletariat.
He's bringing in the peasants.
In effect, yes. I mean, these are basically illiterate peoples. This is not the upper classes of Mexico who are coming. It's the lower classes who have almost no education, who represent a burden of, I think by one estimate, $17,500 more per year than they pay in taxes when such a family comes in. The problem, of course, is in 3 generations, because they do have more conservative social values than the average American now, because they do tend to be religious, anti-abortion, pro-faith, they do have a work ethic, they will in 3 generations be voting Republican. The question is, will America be allowed to survive those 3 generations before Hispanics become Republicans?
Exactly. Lowell, I want to thank you for your time today. I hope you'll come back. Fascinating information.
If you have a few more seconds, could I say one thing?
Well, go ahead. I've got a short break coming here, but go ahead, Lowell.
Oh, okay. We do have a new book out, Craig Smith and I, on another kind of virus threatening us. 20 major risks to your bank account. It's called Don't Bank on It, and we'd be happy to give any of your listeners absolutely free and postpaid a copy just by calling 800-630-1494. That's 1-800-630-1494. It's a fascinating read, and it's totally free.
I'll be in touch with you. I'd like to get a copy myself. Lowell Ponte, thank you so much for your time today, sir.
Hey, God bless you, and thank you for being a courageous beacon of light for people.
Excellent. We'll talk to you again soon, Lowell. We'll be right back. You're listening to The Resistance. Forrest Wilson.
Let's return to We the People with Forrest Wilson. Once again, here's Forrest.
Okay, we're back. Lowell Ponte, fascinating discussion. I've got another guest that I'd like to bring in, a doctor, Dr. Roy Hinman, board-certified American Board of Family Practice. Dr. Hinman's also a military man. He has spent 37 years serving this country with 3 tours in Iraq. His last position, Colonel MC, commanding as Territorial Surgeon, Assistant Territorial, U.S. Virgin Islands, 2003 to 2012. And he retired in 2014. Colonel Dr. Hinman, how are you, sir?
Top of the morning to you, or afternoon.
You know, we hear so much about this Ebola outbreak. Have you been contacted, or is the hospital that you work in been contacted regarding the CDC protocols?
We have had some initial protocol calls into Flagler Hospital in St. Augustine. This has not been an issue, obviously, for us at this time. But with Ebola being highly infectious, much more so than AIDS, that's something we all should be concerned with.
Do you have confidence in the CDC director at this point?
Well, absolutely not. If you listen to their discussions, that the people that we have, of course, one patient that came into the United States that was allowed in without adequate screening to begin with, was hospitalized in a very good private hospital. people were well aware of what his condition was, and according to CDC, with all the proper gear and equipment, the first secondary victim to fall to that was following CDC's protocol and got it. And then they said, "Oh, well, of course, we're not worried about a second person getting it, a secondary person, the third." Because we're happy with our protocols and the way that the protective gear is arranged for use, and it is being used. Well, then we have a second visit. A second person falls prey to Ebola. That is a healthcare worker. Now, imagine AIDS. Now, how many times do we hear somebody getting AIDS from a patient in a hospital, unless somebody suffers a needle stick? Which, of course, neither of these things happen. So these are gowned up, gloved up, protected, aware, hyper alert personnel times two that caught Ebola while from a patient in the hospital they knew about. So quite amazing, that the CDC would feel so confident at this point.
And you listen to the Nurses United conference call, and they talk about the lack of training, the lack of equipment. Does your hospital have the full Ebola?
Of course not. I mean, our mission is not to treat Ebola. Our mission is we have heart attacks, kidney disease, dialysis patients, COPD. We have to worry about it. Our job is to worry about the health care in the United States. It's the job of the president to stop people at the border, do travel bans, quarantines, and stop this from coming in here. It's a huge waste of resources for everybody to devote into Ebola at this time. It's the job of the president to stop it outside the United States, or at least at the borders. Heaven help us if some of these jihadists, Muslim jihadists, look, if they'll strap a bomb into their underwear and blow themselves up, what are we going to do when these guys go and infect themselves with Ebola, go into Guatemala, Mexico, and Honduras, and deliberately infect people where they don't have great hospital services, and we have a flood to the border that's wide open right now? Imagine that. So, we need to focus on what we have in the United States. It's up to the president to take care of these external threats.
And I was reading CNS News, and they're talking about some people that they had caught down in, I guess, one of the borders leading into Mexico. And an embassy person walked over and asked where they were from, and they were told they were from Liberia and had been on the road for about a week. Now, I guess it's easier to get into those countries from Liberia. But in any event, this is in a conversation with Marine Corps General John Kelly. Kelly continued, they met up with the network in Trinidad, and now they're on their way to the United States, illegally, of course, and with the incubation period being 21 days. I mean, they could make it all the way to New York City.
Well, imagine if they put this stuff in a vial, carry it on their body, get close to the border, dump it on themselves. Now they can drive all the way to Chicago before they're infectious, and it's quite easy to spread infection amongst people that aren't protected. Look what it did to the people that were protected. So imagine you get a terrorist that keeps the vial, pops it on himself, drives around the United States, spreads infectious fluid into the unsuspecting public in crowded areas. Can you imagine? So, it's really up to the president to do the serious quarantine work and get a control of our borders, so we don't have a huge deluge of illegal aliens walking across on a daily basis, and either uncaptured or they catch and release.
Well, Dr. Hemmon, I want to get your reaction to something. I played this clip 3 times today, but I think it's important, and I think it gives context to this whole open border crowd and not shutting down any of the flights out of Western Africa. Jack, play clip 8.
Exactly 30 years ago today, I sat where you're sitting now, and a few hours later I rode my bicycle out of Oberlin and down to Tennessee, where I worked as a community organizer for a health clinic.
And that's the CDC director, Dr. Frieden, basically saying that he began his career as a community organizer. That's in a commencement speech in 2012 at Oberlin College.
Well, we've seen the community organizing thing. It hasn't seemed to pass muster for our economic condition here in the United States, our military condition, or our safety on the world stage. With a current court community organizer, it's not much of a background to have for a position of serious leadership in this country.
Yes, and we expect people in those positions to be, they may be a Republican or a Democrat, but we expect them to put those things aside. But it just seems like this is all part of the goal to get as many people in this country
of course,
to support the Democrat cause and ensure Democrat victories in elections going forward.
Yeah, I mean, if you went back to 1957, there were more people of Swiss extraction living in the United States than there were of Mexican extraction in 1957. My God. So we see under Lyndon Johnson big society programs. That was when the flood. It was a constant decision on the Democratic Party to say, look, what we need to do is find ways in the future to open up our borders now, give preferential treatment to those outside non-European type. We got too many of those people in the United States, and let's change the voter base here so we'll have power in the future, and keep it. It's just terrible. So, and that's what you see, that they put party and politics above the defense of the citizens of the United States, because the problem is they don't consider citizenship much to the Democrats that in their party philosophy. It's citizenship is unless they can create a dependent citizenship like your earlier caller called. I mean, look at the Indians on the reservations. I mean, the most dependent people in the world because look how much government help they have. And with the Great Society programs, they have created this huge underclass. They've created the lack of fatherhood at least fatherhood that stays at home in the black community, which has been very destructive on it. Before that was a very close-knit society. So we can see the results of these policies. So, but unfortunately now it's going to damage. It's putting us all at risk on our borders.
I want to get your reaction to the 4,000 military personnel that they sent to Liberia. What is your thoughts on that? Are they going to be effective?
Well, I mean, it depends on effective at what. I mean, you saw what happened to the two people that they knew under sterile conditions came down with the Ebola virus in the hospital when they knew about it. Now, what about our soldiers out there? And God bless them, we got great people out there. Put them in that 115-degree temperature out there. See how long they can stay in those blue suits, how much they sweat, how much they become more likely to get contact with any kind of aerosol or fluid after they change out of their suits. So we should keep our soldiers from fighting the enemy. I don't understand why they're putting the military at risk out there.
What is the answer? What could be done to stop the spread of Ebola in Western Africa?
I mean, look. When Europe figured this out when they had times of the Great Plague, and ever since then, this is the basic public health service policy number one: you quarantine. So you have an effective policy that you say seals off the border as much as possible. You interdict those people at the source. You don't let them in the United States and say, "Oh, don't worry about it. When they fly in, if they give a few people, we'll figure it out. It'll all work out in the end. We can fix it. Let them just come in. We don't want to appear to be racist. Shoot, the other African countries aren't letting them across their borders. If these were Bulgarians, we'd be saying we're not going to let any Bulgarians in if they were highly infected, if they had a high incidence of Ebola. So this is nothing but a smokescreen by the Democratic Party to try to keep the borders open, give them an excuse to let as many people as they can in. It almost looks like the policy is so stupid. You wonder, is this done on purpose? I mean, do they want this stuff to get in the United States? It's just the idiocy of it. Otherwise, it's just mind-boggling.
It is mind-boggling, and you've got all these flights that were taken after that second nurse who called the CDC and said, "Am I clear to travel? I've got a slight fever." And they knew that she had been treating this index patient, Duncan, in Dallas. And they said, "Go ahead and travel." It's 90, I think it was 98.5 or 99.5. It's not 101.5. I mean, we're talking about a degree.
We're talking about what we normally consider normal temperature. So, 98.6 is the average kind of there. So, normal fever is not 100, by definition, 105 and beyond. So, the old statement, "I love my country, but I fear my government," is so applicable here because of their political agenda. The citizens being at risk is not important to them. What is important is recent comments that we have to protect the economies of these Western African countries. We have to protect their right to fly freely. Well, what about considering the rights of the American citizens first and their safety first? And unfortunately, this president or administration, the rights and the safety of the American citizens compared to those in other parts of the world is really a second, third, or fourth concern for them.
And I would have to agree with you. In closing, there is an Ebola documentary that was done a couple of months back, but it was released in September before Eric Thomas Eric Duncan showed up in Dallas with Ebola. And it's ABC, I believe, was the producer of the documentary, and they had one of their doctors who's a reporter. It's about 35 minutes long. We're going to post it on our website, which is wethepeople1787.org. I hope you'll go look at it. But it's about 35 minutes. And what you see in there is a complete breakdown of the civil society that was left in Monrovia. And that's what I fear here.
And everyone has to remember, this is, unlike what they're saying, this is highly infectious. It's a highly infectious disease, much more so than AIDS, and obviously so because we have to look at our eyes. How do you get two space-suited figures that know what's going on? They're being very careful. They know they're following the protocol per CDC, and on top of that, they're in appropriate protective gear, and they get it in a hospital setting in the United States pretty sterile. What happens if it gets on the streets of the United States?
Let's hope that doesn't happen. Dr. Hemman, we'll have to leave it right there. I sure do appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much. May the force be with you.
Thank you. You're listening to The Resistance. Forrest Wilson, AM 600 and FM 100.3. See you next weekend.